It might sound like I'm going to paint these turrets in the incorrect order, but this is going to be the best way to do it, and I'm going to start by painting the roundel. You see, there aren't decals for this roundel for HMS hood. I could print one, and I did consider doing that, but in the end I decided that it'd be better to paint it. I think that getting the roundel to sit nicely over this rather uneven surface would be quite difficult, especially getting it to stick through all these rivets, and I just had a feeling that that would pull the decal, so painting is going to be the best option. So if I am set on painting this roundel onto the roof of the turret, I then need to think about exactly how I'm going to do that. And I want to do it with the minimal amount of masking required, and ideally to also do that without having to align concentric circles of masking tape. As it turns out, it is possible to paint one of these roundels with just one piece of masking tape, provided that the first color that is painted is the outer band of the roundel. This is why I'm painting the roof of the turret in blue, the color for the outer band of the roundel. As for how to make the mask for the roundel itself, I have this compass cutter. It's kind of like a compass, but instead of having a pencil at one end, it has a blade, and I can use this to cut circles. The smallest diameter circle that this cutter can cut is 8 millimeters. This is quite convenient because by my estimation, this roundel should have a diameter of 16 millimeters. That means I need a radius of 4 millimeters for the inner circle and a radius of 8 millimeters for the outer circle. This is literally the smallest diameter roundel of this type that I can make with this tool. That was lucky. After using the compass to cut out the mask for the roundel, I remove it from the cutting mat and then apply it to the roof of the turret. Once on the roof of the turret, I use a ruler just to check that I have it correctly positioned in the center, and once I'm happy with its position in the center, I then push it down firmly onto the roof. Since the roof has these steps in it, it's not possible for me to fully push down the circle without pulling the masking tape and causing the circle to become deformed. So what I need to do is make cuts along these steps such that the tape can fall down without pulling the circle out of position. This will leave a small gap in the masking tape along the step, but that won't be something that is very difficult to correct at a later stage, just using a brush and a little bit of paint. The most important thing at this stage is to have a nice clean circle that will be easy to work with. Since this is a bit of a tricky area and I don't want to have to fight paint that has bled underneath the masking tape, I then spray over the masking tape with a layer of XF86. This is flat clear varnish. I'm using a matte varnish because it has a rougher surface, and that will give subsequent layers of paint a better surface to attach to. After the matte varnish has dried, I spray the center of the roundel with this dark red. This is a paint that I just mixed myself. It's XF7 with a very, very small drop of black paint. It just very slightly darkened that red to make it a bit more subdued than pure XF7. After letting the dark red at the center of the roundel dry, I then apply a rough section of masking tape over the top of the roundel, being sure not to go beyond the borders of the outer circle, and then the entire turret, along with all its other counterparts, can be sprayed in XF53, the color that I'm using to represent HMS Hood's superstructure. As for the blast bags, as much as I'd like to paint them in white just to make the turrets a little bit more interesting, they in fact were painted as the same color as the rest of the superstructure, so I am also painting them in XF53. I'm not being lazy, I'm being accurate. After the XF53 coat has dried, the masking tape for the roundel is removed, revealing a pretty good roundel, although it definitely does need some touch-up, but not a lot. In fact, the red at the center of the roundel looks perfect. That doesn't require any touch-up. It's just a little bit of the blue that requires some touch-up. This blue is XF8. I haven't mixed it with anything. Now that the touch-up for the roundel is complete, I can move on to weathering. The first step, as always, is to spray everything in a gloss varnish. This is Mr. Color GX112 UV Cut Super Clear Gloss. After the gloss varnish has dried, panel line is then applied. This is panel line that's been thinned roughly 2 to 3 parts solvent to 1 part of panel line. The thinned panel line in the gloss coat will help the panel line flow towards the detail and leave less residue to remove. As you can see, this goes on very easily and it does not require any precision at all. I just place the panel line on the details and it flows towards them. After the panel line has been left to dry for around 20 minutes, the excess is ready to be removed. To remove the excess, I'm using a cotton bud. I don't want to use a brush or anything that will really be able to get into the details because that will remove too much of the panel line. A cotton bud, being fairly blunt, will allow me to get off the excess that is on a flat and smooth surface while leaving behind the residue that is intermingled between details. To help loosen the panel line, I have dipped the cotton bud in solvent. Once I'm happy with the effect of the panel line on the turrets, the panel line can then be sealed in with a matte varnish. This is Tamiya XF86 Flat Clear. It doesn't take much of this varnish to matte down the surface, just the light spraying is sufficient. The last bit of assembly for the turrets can now be performed. That is the installation of this UP launcher. As you saw in a previous video, when I constructed all of the UP launchers, I also constructed the fifth one for this turret. So installation is just a matter of applying a small drop of thick super glue to the location in the tub where the UP launcher should be situated, and then placing the UP launcher on that glue. That completes the construction of the turrets. There is one more piece of detail that needs to be dealt with on the forecastle deck and quarter deck, and that is the railing that goes around the perimeter of the deck. When I was painting the turrets in XF53, I also painted the hand railing in XF53, so now I just need to cut them off of their fret and then prepare them for installation on the ship. All of these sections of hand railing are generic, so it's left to you to cut them to fit. In this case, there are some fairings that it needs to clear at the bow. Other than that, there is really nothing that needs to be done to these sections of hand railing other than to cut them to the correct length. To install the hand railings, I start at the bow because it's most tricky there, and I need to work out the position of some of these stanchions. Once I'm happy with the general location of the stanchions, I cut out sections of hand railing to prepare it for installation on the model. To install the hand railing on the model, I apply thick super glue to two segments of the hand railing, and then place the section of hand railing in contact with the side of the ship. Once the first section of hand railing is tacked in place, I move forward and apply more thick super glue to the underside of the forwardmost section of hand railing, and then place it in contact with the side of the ship. I repeat the process on the hand railing working aft. I choose a few sections of hand railing, put a little bit of thick super glue on the underside of the hand railing, and then glue it to the side of the ship. Once the hand railing is properly seated and well tacked in place, the full length of the hand railing is then reinforced with extra thin super glue that I apply with the wire. With the first section of hand railing in place, I now know the exact dimensions of the second section of hand railing, so I cut that off and then make a copy of it for the other side of the ship. I want the hand railing to be symmetrical about the ship. This second piece of hand railing is glued in place using the exact same method as before. I start by applying extra thick super glue to a few sections of hand railing at the forward end of the hand railing, place it in contact with the model, apply more extra thick super glue to the hand railing at the aft end, and then reinforce the bond for the full length of the hand railing using extra thin super glue that I apply with a wire. On the starboard side of the ship, the process is repeated verbatim, although when I was preparing the sections for the port side of the ship, I made duplicates for the starboard side of the ship just to be sure that everything stayed to the exact same dimensions. Fortunately, all my measurements were correct, and I was able to precisely replicate the locations of all of these hand railings, and these two sections went on smoothly and aligned perfectly. That just leaves the quarterdeck to deal with. Here, once again, there are going to be two sections of hand railing on each side of the ship, but on the quarterdeck there aren't any obstacles for the hand railing to get past, so it's even easier than on the forecastle deck. Once again, a few sections of hand railing at one end of the hand railing are selected and super glue is applied. It is then placed in contact with the model. Further sections along the length of the hand railing are selected and more extra thick super glue is applied to those sections, and then they are put in contact with the model. Once the full length of the hand railing is well tacked in place, the entire length of the hand railing is reinforced with extra thin super glue that I apply with a wire. With the first full long section of hand railing in place, I now know the precise width of the gap for the shorter section of hand railing, so I cut an appropriately sized section of hand railing and glued in place using the same method as before. The entire process is then repeated for the port side of the ship, and that completes the installation of the hand railings. For quite a few videos now, going all the way back to the installation of the boats, I've been installing components on the model, but then not dealing with the glossy superglue that is left behind. That's because I had always intended to do what I'm about to do now. That is to take all of the loose components off of the ship and spray the entire model in a light coat of XF86 matte varnish. This will matte down and conceal all that shiny superglue around the cradles for the boats and the machine guns and the anti-aircraft guns and the 4-inch guns and all sorts of other things that have been installed, including the hand railings that I've just installed. Once this light layer of matte varnish has dried, I can move on to the last weathering step, highlighting. As you saw in previous videos, most of the superstructure has already had highlighting done to it. It's just the anti-aircraft guns and the main turrets that don't have any highlighting. And I'm going to use the exact same process as I used for the rest of the ship. That is this snow weathering powder. To apply the weathering powder, I use the soft end of the applicator brush and gently brush it over all of the components that haven't had highlighting done to them. After the weathering powder is applied to the turrets are dropped into their barbettes, and the construction of this model moves into its final stage, rigging. That is what I'm going to be doing in the next video. There might be another video of corrections that happens before or after that, but in either case, this is going to be one of the last videos in the build series. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.